Okay, Kamlesh, we can start.
So we are starting now. Very dear friends and comrades, let me first welcome all of you, all the viewers on the CPIM Facebook Live, to this seminar. Of course, now it's called not a seminar, but a webinar. And welcome to all of you who are watching this program today. It's a very special day for us, and the occasion is the 74th year of India's independence. So let me first start by extending our warm greetings to all of you on this historic day. And on this historic day, we also, first of all, pay homage, pay our tributes to our most brave freedom fighters, to our martyrs, to the hundreds and thousands of our country women and men who had sacrificed so much to ensure India's independence from the British colonial regime. Today, in this seminar, let me welcome the eminent panel that we have. First of all, our General Secretary, Comrade Sitaram Yechury. Welcome, Comrade Sitaram. Comrade Sitaram will be giving the valedictory address, that is the concluding address. I also welcome Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan, Politburo member and Chief Minister of Kerala. He is not able to come on right now. He is in self-quarantine, but he is listening to the seminar. He is there present with us, and he has also recorded his inaugural speech, which we will listen to shortly. I also extend a warm welcome to our Politburo members, Comrade Prakash Karat, Comrade Manik Sarkar, Comrade Shurjo Kanta Mishra. And today we will be discussing, the theme of our discussion today is defending India's independence. And we will be looking at different aspects of India's independence, the history of the freedom struggle, the main values which enabled a country like India to put an end to the all-powerful British Raj, and the relevance of those issues for our struggles today in India. And just to put a few questions before we begin the inaugural address, I think one of the most critical questions that when we talk about defending India's independence, I think one of the most critical questions is defending India's independence from whom? Who is responsible for putting our independence in jeopardy so that today we have to talk about defending India's independence? So from whom? What are those forces? Who are those forces? And we defend India's independence for whom? And what is the role of the defense of India's independence? And we know that, and we are proud that the Communist Party, from its very birth, its inception, the history of the Communist Party has been deeply intertwined with the history of the freedom struggle in the beginning from the early 20th century. And we are also proud that it was communists who first raised the slogan of India's independence. But today, we are in a situation, my dear friends, when we raise the question from where it comes, where the danger comes. The danger lies within. The danger lies within because today we have a ruling government in India, a ruling dispensation in India, the BJP and the RSS. They and their political forefathers were never part of this freedom struggle. They had no role to play in the freedom struggle. Those who unfurl the tricolor today, their politics, their path has never been on the basis of the values of the freedom struggle. And therefore, when they are in power today, and if that power is utilized to take forward that very sectarian agenda, which had in fact played a role not of strengthening the freedom struggle, but of weakening it, where would we stand and where do we stand in India today? It is those basic values, the framework of which helped us to fight for independence and were victorious to win that independence, that are under serious challenge today. We live in a situation where the Constitution is in danger, and along with that, the very basic fundamental principles of equality for which we Indians had sacrificed so much. The inequalities in India, the social and economic inequalities in India. We talk about Atmanirbhar. Where is our national sovereignty today? And can India as a nation exist without secularism and democracy? So these are the issues which we are going to be discussing today. And Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan, as I had said, he is in self-quarantine today and will be for the next couple of days because, you know, at the time of the plane crash in Kerala, he had to go there and the collector there has tested COVID positive. So he has recorded his speech for us. So we are going to listen to that recorded speech. And then we are going to deal not only with the present situation, but how we see the development of the resistance, the development of the path to save India and to save India's independence. So let us listen now to the words of Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan on the lessons of the freedom struggle.
Dear comrades and friends, it is with immense happiness that I participate in this national webinar, which is being held under the auspices of the Central Committee of the CPIM. It is in the fitness of things that the CC chose to hold a detailed discussion on what we have achieved and what is left be achieved. This offers a platform to analyze the present national situation against the backdrop of more than 7 decades of Indian independence. 73 years is not too small a span of time to take stock of what has happened since independence. Before getting into it, we have to look at the emergence of the nationalist movement and the lessons it taught us. As everybody knows, we are confronted with a series of threats against the very existence of us as a nation. We have to collectively ponder over this and find out the ways to tide over the crisis. The economic sovereignty is sought to be done away with by the forces of international finance capital. Driven by the greed of quick and speculative profits, they attempt to constrain the fiscal and monetary policies of nation states. This has been detrimental not only to us but also to many nations which threw off the colonial yoke in the last century and embarked on the path of indigenous development. On top of these efforts are want to see that our country is balkanized on communal lines. It is against this backdrop that we have to reflect upon the past and chalk out a democratic, secular, and socialist alternative. The first 3 decades of the last century witnessed major events at the world level. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 in Russia not only overthrew one of the most oppressive regimes but also kindled the spirit of freedom in many colonial countries. Working class movements, which sprang up in small groups, quickly gathered support from the emerging industrial working class and the peasantry. The colonial rulers attempted to put down these movements through false cases and imprisoned the leaders of the movements for long years. The infamous Meerut and Kanpur conspiracy cases against the nascent Communist Party are examples of this. Apart from the emergence of working class parties, the beginning of the 1920s also witnessed the Congress Party, which was a movement of limited participation in its early days, becoming a mass movement engaged in popular struggles like the non-cooperation movement. Though Congress was very much present in the national political scenario, it was the rise of the left that gave a political content to the national agenda. The left also contributed in big way in evolving the economic, social and political policy too. The intervention of the left accelerated the anti-imperialist upsurge all over the country in a gateway. The peasant worker struggles got a genuine fillip as a result of the joint movements that witnessed during that era, and it enthused the anti-imperialist national struggle throughout the length and breadth of our country. The declaration of Purna Swaraj as a goal in place of dominion status was a substantial contribution of the left stream of Indian politics. Towards the end of the second decade of the last century, the capitalist countries underwent a major economic depression, which resulted in large-scale unemployment and stagnation. Discontent against British imperialism grew in a big way in the 1930s. Socialist ideas gathered momentum within the Congress Party under the banner of Congress Socialist Party. Congress itself was compelled to adopt one economic program with a substantial redistributive content in its Karachi session of 1930. This is the beginning of socialist ideas gaining acceptance within the nationalist movement. Agitation sprang up against native kingdoms which followed many obscurantist practices. The movement to secure the rights of the oppressed castes for walking through the streets adjoining temples and for temple entry in the state of Travancore is part of this. The peasant struggles of Malabar, which challenged landlordism, were sought to be given a communal color. The progressive forces grew fighting against these kinds of malicious propaganda, which sought to divide the toiling masses and foil their united struggles. Freedom struggle culminated with the memorable fight by the Royal Indian Navy personnel who raised the flags of the Congress, Communists and the Muslim League. The British left India in 1947. Could we put an end to our struggles? The answer is an emphatic no. At the dawn of independence, the lessons learned from the freedom movement became highly valuable in the onward struggle against social and economic inequality. Our nation building was a task to be accomplished by weaving threads of unity among diversities. A foremost task was the linguistic reorganization of the states. The nationalist movement accepted this as early as 1921 by reorganizing the provincial Congress committees on linguistic basis. But after attaining independence, our rulers were very reluctant to implement this. The important lesson of popular resistance from the freedom struggle was practiced to get this demand accepted. The fast unto death of Poti Sriramalu was an example. The intellectual content given by communist leaders like Comrade EMS P. Sundaraiah catalyzed this movement. Finally, the regime had to accept linguistic reorganization of the states by 1956. The acceptance of the Karachi economic program got reflected in the directive principles of the constitution to a certain extent. But the progress was halting and big struggles were required to achieve redistribution of the prime asset land, which even today is a dream in vast areas of our country. Only in states where left parties come to power, land reforms have been implemented. In the first decade of independence, the Congress under Nehru's leadership accepted the role of public sector in India's economic development. The Avadi session of the Congress in 1956 stated that building a socialistic pattern of society should be the aim. This remained more of a statement than a reality. Since 1990s, even the rhetoric of socialism has been thrown to winds. The neoliberal economic policies have cast away the lessons of economic redistribution, which had been part of our political ethos since the early days of our freedom movement. Our constitution was drafted on the basis of the values that the nationalist movement had put forward as noble causes. It emphasized the need to strengthen our sovereignty and self-reliance. Taking a cue from that, the Union government, right from the very beginning, highlighted the role of the public sector and made it a decisive factor in the building up of our economy. To a great extent, it strengthened our economy. Great institutions were launched in the public sector and it paved the way for the growth of allied sectors too. However, with the advent of the policy of globalization, the Congress government since 1990s started to sell off the prestigious public sector institutions. The BJP government, which assumed office close on the heels of the Congress governments, too pursued the very same policy with renewed vigor. It went to the extent of doing away with the gains that we accrued in the post-independence period. The land for the tiller was a slogan which came up during the nationalist movement, as peasants had a decisive role in our freedom struggle. However, the Congress government chose to ignore it when it came to power, and the slogans highlighting the demands of the peasants were given a go-by. Had surplus land been distributed among the landless, the purchasing power of the masses would have gone up, and in turn, it would have streamlined the economy in a big way. Instead of adopting such a path, the Congress government went in for the policy of globalization, which was detrimental to the interests of the nation on the one hand and beneficial to the corporates on the other. The Congress government and the subsequent BJP regime cut short even whatever subsidy the agricultural sector was getting previously. It was as per the dictates of the international financial institutions which are being run by imperialists. During the freedom struggles, everybody dreamed of a world in which everyone will get education and employment. This hope also inspired the youth to join the mainstream of the independence struggle in a big way. The disenchantment among the youth on this count was grossly misused by divisive and communal forces. India still continues as a country that has the record number of illiterates. The non-alignment policy also was the heritage that we received from the freedom movement. It enabled us to chalk out an independent course which kept capitalist and imperialist countries at a distance. So many developing countries, inspired by this policy, came under the umbrella of the non-alignment policy, and India rose to the leadership of that movement with enhanced prestige. It was as per that policy that we decided not to have any diplomatic relations with Israel, which had unleashed a series of heinous genocides on the helpless Palestinians, who were craving for a land of their own. It was rather unfortunate that India, during the regime of the Congress, re-established diplomatic ties with Israel and allowed them to open their diplomatic offices in our land. It amounted to the unfortunate letdown of the Palestinians, who always had seen us as their well-wishers. India went to the extent of having military alliances with Israel and holding joint military exercises with Israel and NATO countries. A series of military cooperation agreements were signed between India and Israel at the behest of the United States, which always had taken an anti-Indian stand on almost all international matters, ranging from the question of our membership in the UN Security Council to the question of bilateral ties between India and Pakistan. The BJP NDA government, which took over following the Congress regime, continued this pro-Israel, pro-US stand with much more vehemence and did away with whatever traces were left of the non-aligned policy. This only led to complete isolation of India in the realm of international relations. When the Indian government started aligning with the US, it chose to finish off the public sector institutions, which were established during the Soviet era, taking inspiration from the socialist policy held up by the Soviet Union. What we witness in independent India is the repeat of the divide and rule policy, which was evolved and implemented by the British earlier. Congress government adopted the very same policy and chose to turn one community against the other, and in the process ruined the basic structure of unity in diversity, which is crucial to secularism. In the process, the Congress went to the extreme of bringing down the secular government led by VP Singh by voting together with the BJP, a shocking experience to the secular-minded people. It has to be noted that it was that anti-secular stand of the Congress that helped the BJP to raise its numbers in the Lok Sabha from 2 to more than 300 now. Congress has to be held accountable for this. All through the regime, Congress was bent on demolishing the federal structure of the country, which was a great value enshrined in our constitution. It began with the ousting of the democratically elected EMS government of Kerala in 1959 and continued till the end of the Congress rule. The BJP too has adopted the same policy, and even the Supreme Court had to intervene at times to see that democratically elected governments are restored. The rights of the states were arbitrarily taken away by the center, and the states were at the losing end, so far as revenue was concerned. The center consistently breached the promises to compensate, and this breach gets reflected even in the matter of GST. All these aspects prove that both the Congress and the BJP are birds of the same feather as far as democratic rights, federal principles, economic policy, external affairs, etc. are concerned. Against this backdrop, what is required at this point of time is joint struggles and joint movements, which would strengthen our constitution, democracy, secularism, and the sovereignty of the nation. The democratic rights of the common people have been jeopardized many times in independent India. Arbitrary detention without trial has been used to suppress the struggles of the working class. The left in India has taken a leading role in fighting against this in judicial and parliamentary forums and through mass movements. The case A.K. Gopalan versus State of Madras has been a landmark in this fight. The legendary communist leader AKG fought against arbitrary detention in this case. The internal emergency, which was declared in June 1975, was yet another example of the non-commitment of the ruling classes to the democratic values and civil liberties. Today, the rights of the toiling masses are being trampled upon to protect the interest of corporate capital. The basic human rights, including the right to life, is under threat from barbaric acts like lynching by violent mobs. Communal frenzy is being encouraged to polarize and divide the society. In short, our basic values of democracy and secularism are facing substantial threat from the present dispensation. Secularism is something which can be realized only by forging unity among the masses who are compelled to fight for a decent living in our society. This has been the stand of the left since the days of freedom struggle. Unfortunately, this was not given the seriousness it deserved by the conservative sections of the Congress leadership. The lofty ideals of the nationalist struggle are being despised. The fabric of the Indian nation, which is aligned to communalism, is under severe attack. The lessons of the freedom movement, which taught us to fight shoulder to shoulder, forgetting caste, religion, and economic status, need to be reinforced for holding us together as a nation and fight against economic and social inequalities. Only this can enable us to march ahead towards achieving an egalitarian society, in contrast to the concentration of the wealth and power that we witness today as a sequel to the neoliberal economical policies. We are in the cusp of history. The lessons of the nationalist movements and innumerable struggles of peasants and workers to throw off the imperialist regime are more relevant today than ever before. We can ignore them only at our own peril. Against this backdrop, what I have to point out is a four-pronged strategy. First, come to the aid of the sovereignty of our nation, both the economic and political. Second, defend our constitution and the constitutional institutions. Third, resist the menacing communal moves to turn India into a theocratic country and uphold the secular values. Fourth, make it doubly sure that our democracy survives the authoritarian onslaughts, imbibing the spirit of the nationalist movement. We talk the pledge that we rededicate ourselves to this land and its people. Thank you.
So that was Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan in his inaugural speech, laying out the various issues which are relevant to us today. Comrade Manik Sarkar, may I request you, you are going to be speaking to us on the issue of democracy and the all-out attack on democracy under the Modi BJP RSS regime. Comrade Manik?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Namaskar. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please go ahead, Comrade.
Yes.
Comrade Chairperson, my colleague, Politburo members of the Communist Party of India Marxist, who are taking part in these very important, valuable discussions, the listeners amongst whom my mothers, sisters, brothers, and friends. At the outset, I would like to convey my greetings on the occasion of 74th Independence Day of India. I want to pay my homage to the grand and glorious memories of the valiant martyrs of the freedom struggle. The Independence Day is a day of pride for the people of India. But I would like to say this should be taken as a day for serious
Is it over?
introspection instead of observing it as a ritual function with festivity. So I think keeping this in mind, the organizers of the discussion, they have actually chosen the items, the subject on which I am to speak, that is democracy under attack. It's a very relevant topics, and I should also say it's a burning issue to the people of India. So, in this situation, what I would like to tell, starting with the discussion of this particular subject, we shall have to look back. During the freedom struggle, one of the main objectives was set up a democratic state after ouster of British rulers from the land of India. And also in the preamble of the Constitution of India, it is said that people of India resolved to constitute a sovereign, democratic, secular, socialist Republic India. The bedrock of our constitution, that is democracy. Democracy means equal rights to all. According to our constitution, parliamentary democracy has given importance in the development of democratic setup in India. In parliamentary democracy, election is a must every after 5 years, but the field must remain level for all. No person, no party should be given special scope. All should be given the equal scope and opportunity. But what is going on nowadays in India? Money power, muscle power, media power being used like anything to vitiate the election atmosphere of our country by the ruling clique using the state power and machineries. They are actually converting this election system into a farce. That is the most important thing. the same time, Parliament is the highest institution in our country after the election. What is happening there? Nowadays, Parliament, importance of Parliament is undermined. The importance of debate on the basis of logic, arguments, that is not being given priority. Only on the basis of number, strength of number, the ruling party, they are passing one after another act or bill to take care of their interest, particularly for whom day in and day out the ruling clique is working. In this way, Parliament is undermined and the structure of our country, that is our federal structure, there is no mandate that those who are running the country, sitting in the state power, that in each and every state, that party should have government. If that is there, what's the point of federal structure? But what is going on nowadays? In the states where the government is or are being run by some such parties who do not go down the lines given by the center, who are not agreeing with them, the central government, they, this way or that way, trying their level best to dislodge and oust those government and occupy the chair of power by the central ruling parties. So thus, the federal structure is attacked like anything. My point is this: all these are related to democracy. If democracy is undermined, then what is the relevance of secular principles, federal structure, and formation a republic government? These are actually become irrelevant. That is the crude experience of the people of our country nowadays. So, you see, democracy means equal rights to all. I would like to put this question: whether women are enjoying equal rights with men? If it is such, not equal seats in the parliament, 1/3 seats to be reserved for the women, that has not yet been accepted to and implemented. Who are opposing it? Why opposing? Those who are listening me, they know better than me. Scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, they are the worst sufferer, backwardmost people population of our country. Their social rights, their cultural rights, their economic rights, all are being neglected and they are being deprived of all these rights and facilities. Where remains the equality? The protection of minorities. I think it is the acid test for democracy. But what is the state of affair of the minorities in our country, they are attacked like anything. Their food habit, their lifestyle, all are under attack. From the religious point of view, if this is allowed to go, continue, what will remain in India? How the unity will develop? That's a question. Then, freedom of speech, civil liberties, right to say no, express disagreement with the decisions, directives, dictum of the government, ruling clique, that are not being heeded to. Rather, those who are trying to exercise their freedom of speech, civil liberties, etc., they are now being treated as anti-national, and they are being thrown behind the bar using black laws, old or new. That is what is going on. Media, that is one of the very important and relevant pillars of our democracy. Where is freedom for the media? Those who are courageously trying to express their dissenting views, trying to take their own position, they are being used and suppressed like anything. Not even that. They are being put behind the bar. There also they are not ending. Even at places, they are attacked, they are killed. What is going on all these things? You see, this election commission, judiciary, CAG, Reserve Bank of India, even CBI, in the Constitution of India, some special rights and opportunities are provided to these institutions to exercise their authority freely, fearlessly, strengthen the understanding of democracy which is enshrined in our Constitution. But nowadays, they are intervened by the ruling clique so that their activities, their stand, their decisions are suited to their interest. That is going on. The Constitution of India, that is directly attacked. This abrogation of the provision of 370, you know, I don't like to narrate all these things. The amendment to the Citizenship Act, these are nothing but direct assault and attack on the Constitution of India. All these things are going on. My point is this: why this attack on democracy? What is wrong with democracy? What is the experience of history? Attack on democracy does never come from the working class, working people, poorest of the poor, downtrodden people. Rather, it comes from the ruling party, who are taking care of the interest of the exploiters by using the state power and machineries. That is what is happening in our country nowadays. In our country, those who are running the state, what is their class character? This is the combination of the bourgeoisie and landlords, led by big bourgeoisie. And clandestinely or openly, they are collaborating with the imperialist forces right from the beginning. Who does not know it? And nowadays, very openly, they are collaborating with the imperialist and working as a junior partner of American imperialism. So in this situation, to the people of India, very much clear that what was promised during the freedom struggle of India after the ouster of the British rulers, formation of the Democratic Republic of India, the state power will take care of the basic problem being faced by the common people of our country. Food, shelter, clothing, education, healthcare, and obviously, of course, job, which will give actually guarantee to take care of all other problems. They have realized that those who are in the state power, they are not in a mood, not in a position to take care of all these problems because they are busy with the interest of the exploiting sections of the society. In percentage wise, their number may not be 7 to 10%. We know. So people have started getting restive. They have started coming out. They are trying to take part in the struggles this way, that way. And they are not in a position to be dictated by the ruling clique. This way, that way being expressed to even in the outcome of the election. Of course, the ruling party somehow rather they are managing the numbers, but percentage wise, they are not getting big percentage of votes. Even this time, last time also, only 45 or 47% of vote altogether. This is one hand. On the other hand, the ruling clique, they have also started realizing that people are not being controlled by their dictum. The people have lost their trust and faith in them. That is why the ruling clique also losing their faith and confidence in the people. They have started realizing even if they try, they will not be able to carry people with them with their dictum. In this situation, to take care of the interest of the classes, the monopoly capital, landlords, corporates. So they are attacking democracy blatantly, ruthlessly. And in this situation, what I would like to say, this sort of attack should not be tolerated. It needs to be protested, prevented. Otherwise, this attack will further be mounted. So in this situation, I would say the issue of democracy cannot be seen in isolation from other economic issues on which the livelihood and existence of the people remain. So thereby, issue of democracy and other issues simultaneously we shall have to take care of. One thing should be kept in your mind, democracy is like oxygen. Without oxygen, human being cannot breathe and exist his life. Without democracy, a society cannot be vibrant. Without vibrancy, how civilization will be further consolidated and advance? If it fails to advance, how the standard of life of the common people will be advanced? Therefore, democracy is very, very important component for the advancement of the society, maintain its vibrancy, for taking care of the common problem of the common people of our country. In this situation, what I would emphatically say, there is no other option but to go for struggle. And in this situation, there is need of development of broadest possible unity among different sections of the people. And I would say that ultimately, the struggling people, they will win over in this coming struggle. The ruling clique, who have been persecuting their tyrannic rule, they may today or day after tomorrow may win this or that battle, but ultimately they will have to be defeated in the hands of the struggling people of India. With this, I like to conclude. Thank you all who have listened me.
Thank you very much, Comrade Manik. You have linked the struggle for democracy to basic socio-economic structures, the configuration of class forces in India, and of course, the huge attack by the BJP RSS government on basic democratic rights. Thank you very much. And may I also add that our demand from this platform also is for the release of all political prisoners, for the restoration of democratic rights to the people of Kashmir, and that those demands flow from your speech. Thank you very much, Comrade Manik. Comrade Prakash, may I request you to can you hear me? Comrade Prakash was having some problems with the device. Can you hear me, Prakash? Pranjal? You can't? Okay. So till you get your device in order, Comrade Shurjo, may I please request you, Comrade Shurjo Khan Mishra, may I request you to please come in and you are going to enlighten us on the huge assault on the issue of secularism, one of the most critical pillars of India today. So the attack on secularism, Comrade Shurjo.
Oh, thank you. I think I am audible to everybody, and I would like to greet all those who are with us in this virtual meeting and listening to us. And of course, I have an Independence Day, though the independence of our country is under threat. The subject that I had seen that I have been asked to speak about is the national unity and secularism. And therefore, they are inseparable, actually. The questions that we had been discussing, that my previous speakers have said, they are very much interrelated. The attack we are facing now is a multi-pronged, is a multidimensional attack on the life and livelihood of the people, attack on their democratic rights, attack on secularism, one of the basics, fundamental character of our constitution, the attack on the sovereignty, economic, political, everything that compromising on these issues, I mean, the ruling class here, and that. So, and of course, the attack of COVID-19, which has worsened all this attack and which has been utilized by the ruling class, by the government in particular, be it, of course, I mean, mostly union government, but the state governments, some of them, at least Bengal, I can say that they utilize it to intensify all these attacks from different on different issues. Yeah, I think that I should start with this question of the national unity that I'm asked to speak, and that is inseparably linked with secularism. I will come to that frequently. But the national unity question takes me to the question of concept of nation, nationality, and all that. So that way India is the most interesting. I mean, I would say that I can't take pride, but I'm happy to be born in India because here you see such a university among so many diversities that we have. Is very rare thing to find even any other country now. And that is this. It is good to remember that officially we have uh, 1618, 1618 official languages going by the records. I think that is what I have read last, but it could have increased. Sometimes they keep on adding, including the state legislatures. So, and we have some 6,400 castes, etc. in this country. We have six major religions. I mean, people are related to different six major religions. Six major religions of the world, and four of them which have originated from India itself. Yeah, out of these six, and we do have some. I mean, if you go to anthropological category and anthropologically defined, I mean, distinguished ethnic groups could be more even because now that research is on and modern scientific research is being utilized to track how the genes transfer from Northeast Africa to all along Europe to Asia and subsequently America and Australia. And now that these things are available, this the anthropological categories would be more. I think I'm not going into that. Then there are, at least you see that roughly around 29 religious cultural festivals that we have in this country. I don't think we have seen it anywhere else. And for that example, that we have the largest number of holidays in the country, among the country, religious cultural festivals. That's the main reason of these holidays that we have in India. We had some 660 princely states. That is something. It is, each of them have their history, their traditions, so their culture and all that. So that diversity, that's one of the biggest diversity that we see. Unity in the diversity is something is challenging trust, and India did achieve to some extent to have an example, to have a the this issue of, I mean, the nationality issue and the to forge the national unity during the independence struggle. It's our history that so far we have studied the history of independence and all that. I'm not going back to that because Comrade Pinarayi has said something about it, and the other comrades may also have most things to say. But it is nationally or internationally, researchers have accepted this, that it is the freedom movement, particularly in last 2-3 decades of the freedom movement, that the idea of India, the concept underlying what is the India that we want to have after freedom movement is something that the national unity question came to the fore, and it was possible that in spite of so many diversities, or the nationalities that we have, we can say that it's a plurinational country, India. We have. I don't use the word multinational because that refers to capital. That do not refer to people or citizens. So, but it's a plurinational country. It's something of its own type. Is such a diversity is something, and that is the product that has developed during the freedom movement and the anti-imperialist movement, and yes, of course, that got reflected in the India. We started from 15th August 1947. But then it is a great thing to achieve it, and but we have defined the things that developed in 1947, 15th August, the independence is that it has its own limitations. The limitations, some of which has already been discussed, because limitations are that the nationality, nation, the national unity and all these things comes in a developed setup, in a fully capitalist developed setup, having no pre-capitalist relation, the concept of modern nation, etc., that goes back, well, back to early capitalism, some 1640, 44, that what we call Westphalian peace or Westphalian nationalism. But that was in the background of what we call days of mercantile capital. But subsequent to industrial revolution, Renaissance, age of reason, development of science, and all this, that, for example, that time, the French Revolution, where they could first have a republic, that first French Republic, say, for example, and many others followed or predated it during that time. The concept of nationality, I mean, that could be separated from the religion and other things. The separation of church from the state is some big achievement, that the first secular idea that was developing, and that is what is the background in which India got independence, but having pre-capitalist relations remaining. That is something that is applicable for India or for most of the newly independent countries that has have a limited capitalist development. So it is in this background, not doing away with these pre-capitalist relations, that has been said, dealt with in more details by Comrade Pinarayi Vijayan. So that, and the other thing, the role of imperialism, that is something, and the concept of nationality has been, national unity has been, I mean, attacked, not only from the internal, that is the most important thing, but the external factor remains, that it's an era of imperialism, and the character of nation states have changed, and how that got into war and all that is something that we are not going into here. But what has happened in, say, 70s, particularly 73, if you say, that time when the neoliberal order started in Latin America, then subsequently all over the world, and maybe we say formally 1991 in India, that the concept of the national unity, it came under a threat, because one of the international capital, the so-called globalization of the finance capital, there is an attack on the independent national state itself, their sovereignty, their decide to write on the things that they will decide and all that. So that dominates over the national agenda, and they can intervene there. That things have changed, I think, and that has been worse after the neoliberal order has been in crisis, and that we are in now in a crisis, that worst crisis in terms of income, in terms of total production, the worst, recession that we have witnessed is not only in the 20th century recessions, that, but even 19th century, when there was massive attack on income world over. 1870, this is not my statement, this is, the Secretary General of WHO last statement, that they have compared it with a income loss to that of 1870. So in a situation like this, when this powerful international capital, the neoliberal order, the so-called globalization of this capital, all this had unleashed offensive widely all over the world. The concept of nation and their national, choice to determine things have changed, and this had an attack inside the country. That is internal factor that has been said, that the rise of the right-wing forces, the BJP, world over and here also, that is threatened the federal structure that we had in India. And the structure in federal, imagine that the Prime Minister going to Ajodhya to give a speech and talking about new India, the modern India, but in reality, they are taking us back to those days of Westphalian nationalism. That is the background where the national unity question has to be discussed. We have done away with the state with the highest population of Muslim minority, Jammu and Kashmir. And it is on that 5th August that he had been there to Ajodhya, and the attack, the outright attack that the Prime Minister can do, accompanied by this RSS chief and that I reckon that fellow, other fellow there, and I don't know what happened to them. That they said that will lead to, I mean, that will lead to help them to get out of this corona when this temple and that Bhumi Pujan is done. But I'm sorry to see that the main Mohantar is affected and other people are affected. I don't know. So, I mean, this crisis is not helping. I mean, accelerating the other crisis. And along with that, this attack on secularism, it is widely known. I'm not going into detail that the basic structure of the constitution that state cannot have any religion. That's, I mean, decided so long back. The state has no religion. People have right to practice their own whatever religion they believe in, or people like me or us, those who do not, I mean, have any practice any particular this or that religion. But the state cannot have another religion. This is the first time the Prime Minister like this would have gone to Ajodhya to do things like that, and this is more or less reflected in today's speech, whatever the future is. And that we have two categories. The second category is religion they want. They want a Hindu Rashtra, and this Hindu Rashtra is nothing to do with Hinduism, nothing to do with religion, but it is basically to have an overarching unity of the people or based on a pulse consciousness, based on a post-truth construct. What is not true is to do away with the diversities and to have them united in the fringe of Hinduism. I mean, the Hindu Rashtra and all that. And a majoritarian thing that what is now, I mean, inclusive to get rid of it is that this whatever we had, and that is the great threat that we have now. I am not going into other details, and that is to divert the attention of the people to the issue they want, so that the basic issues they can turn away their, I mean, attention, utilize their sentiment, their feeling, or their tradition, whatever it is, for a purpose, a political purpose, to incentivize all the attacks that multi-pronged attacks that we are in. So the point is now that this is a fascistic attack because we have, I mean, come to a conclusion long back, as back in 2000, in the beginning of the century, that the ruling class parties, the bourgeois parties or whatever what you call it, the ruling class parties, they follow the same policy. There is a question of what degree and all that. But BJP is a party that we do not equate with any other ruling class party, simply because, as we have said very clearly, it is our understanding that we laid down in the program 20 years back, that BJP is a party that is run by RSS. That's the only political party you see that does not control itself. RSS controls it. At earlier Hindu Mahasabha, then Jan Sangh, then now BJP, and that's a party, and that's a fascistic organization, and we know what they can do and what they cannot do, and that is the greatest danger. That being the greatest danger before us, and backed by the international finance capital, backed by the chronic capitalism world over, backed by the collapse of the neoliberal order and the subsequent crisis, and with these three countries and the country chiefs that almost pronounced, I mean, taken them together, one is the United States, then Brazil and India, be a number of COVID cases or number of testing, number of positive, number of deaths, and so on. So that means they are that to become more and more dependent in the name of being independent. Atmanirbhar, that what he's speaking is about, that making our country dependent on this imperialism, in particular American imperialism. That is the external thing and internal thing. We have to fight. We have to have our international solidarity to be utilized. That is most important. Our nationalism has nothing, no contradiction with our internationalism. The understanding that we have, that is important for India, that is important for the global struggle, of which our party is a struggle here in this country. And we have, as Manik said, the broadest possible united platform for the struggle. And the struggle, and keeping it in mind that unity of the working class is something that is very important. Working class presently, the class struggle and the mass struggle, and all secular forces, at least not communal forces, that has to be together to fight this menace. And that's the challenge that we have before us, and we have to overcome. If we believe, we shall overcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Comrade Shurjo. And that was a very important point, that issue of the RSS and the fact that the BJP is the political front of a force, such a toxic communal force, which does not at all have any respect and in fact wants to work against and destroy the Constitution of India. So thank you for that. I think Comrade Prakash is now able to join us in his, because he missed the last slot. Comrade Prakash, if you can hear me. Thank you. So
Yes.
Comrade Prakash is going to speak on the issues of national sovereignty in defending India. Yes, Comrade.
Yes, comrades and friends, when we are observing the 74th anniversary of Indian independence, at no time in these last 73 years that we have completed has India been faced with a situation where its independence and sovereignty itself is being undermined and threatened. When we talk about national sovereignty, it is directly connected with independence. You cannot separate independence from sovereignty. If you lose national sovereignty, then you're bound to lose national independence. And if your national independence gets eroded, then it will affect your sovereignty. So when India became a free country on 15th August 1947, became an independent nation state, it also, along with that, acquired national sovereignty for the first time after overthrowing colonialism. Now, in the last 73 years, what has happened is that this national sovereignty is now under siege. This has happened because of various developments over the decades internationally and because of the domestic national policies that have been pursued by our ruling classes. National sovereignty means what? It means that within a national territory, there is a state, and the people in that state and the state exercise sovereignty over the government, the total affairs of that state or country without external direction or interference. Now, India, when it set out after independence to build this independent nation state, the economic, political, and social policies which were adopted at that time were more or by and large in tune with the goal of consolidating national independence and sovereignty. But that has got undermined, particularly in the last 3 decades. First of all, because of imperialist globalization and our ruling classes accepting to integrate their policies with international finance capital. So the economic aspects of sovereignty, talk about economic sovereignty as part of the overall sovereignty. That has got undermined because the trajectory our country is taking, type of economic growth and the economy that we have today is inimical to our sovereignty. What do I mean by that? Today, for instance, during this pandemic, all of us have been demanding, not only the working class movement, the left movement, even sections of the bourgeoisie, not only in India but internationally, that you have to spend more money, public expenditure, put money into the pockets of people. When they have lost jobs, incomes, livelihoods, you have to do this. But this government, the Modi government, has stubbornly refused to transfer money to the people, refused to increase the public expenditure. After all this much touted economic package of 20 lakh crore rupees, we found finally only 1% of the GDP has been actually given in terms of additional resources of funding. Why do they not do it? It is in their self-interest, in fact, to see that people get some money, and that helps to revive demand and the economy. But they do not do it because it goes against the dictates of foreign finance, international finance capital, because they cannot increase the fiscal deficit. Not because they don't want to, but they are not allowed to. In case the fiscal deficit goes beyond a certain limit, then the credit rating agencies will reduce India's ratings. Capital will flow out of the country. There'll be a flight of capital. And this is what something the Indian ruling class are mortally afraid of. So they will not, though they have the means, the resources to pump in money into the economy, they will not do it. So an elementary thing where the question of the basic livelihood and sustenance of the Indian people are concerned, priorities. If it is a sovereign country, a sovereign power, policy making will be prioritizing this. What are the people's needs? But they cannot do it because their sovereignty is itself eroded or compromised because they have to accept the dictates of international finance capital. And since joined this integration with finance capital and neoliberal policies, we have found that all the foundations for the economy to make it a self-reliant or an economy which does not depend on the vagaries of international finance capital, that have all gone. Public sector, which is one of the pillars of this strategy, that is being dismantled, and in such a way it has been speeded up in the last 1 year, particularly in the period of the pandemic. Natural resources of the country. Any sovereign country would see how our natural resources must be conserved and utilized for the interests of the country. But we are opened up all natural resources to be looted by not only Indian big bourgeoisie, but by foreign capital and multinational corporations. So, economic sovereignty gets eroded under this imperialist globalization and the policies which the ruling class have adopted of collaborating and cooperating with international finance capital. This is a finance-driven globalization. The second point in this to be noted is that along with this undermining of economic sovereignty, find the last 3 decades, the shift has come, which reflects itself on the politics and foreign policy also. If you look at the foreign policy of the country, which I have also mentioned, Honorable Pinarayi talked about the non-alignment foreign policy, etc. Today, what started in 1991-92, the policies of liberalization and the shift to the neoliberal policies, along with that we found a shift in the foreign policy and our overall strategic goals. But before coming to that, this period of globalization, its impact, and our adoption of neoliberal policies coincided, not a coincidence, with the rise of Hindutva communalism and the whole rise of the Hindutva so-called nationalist movement, which today has reached its peak, and we are seeing those very forces are in power for the last 6 years. Now, national sovereignty and national independence depends, as I said, on people's sovereignty and people's unity. You can have a country, you can have a flag, you can have a government and a state, but you lose sovereignty if the people's will and sovereignty is not there. And what Hindutva has done is to divide and disrupt this people's unity. And once that takes place, it will weaken your sovereignty and eventually lead to weakening your independence. You can see today what is happening in Lebanon. A lot of talk is there about the crisis in Lebanon. Immediately, it's because of that huge blast, the chemical blast that took place. But much before that, the crisis was so deep because Lebanon is a country. It's an independent country. It has got a state, it's got a flag, it's got a government. But since they were liberated, not through any struggle, of course, through a division of the imperialist powers, finally France said, okay, we create a new state called Lebanon. But the people of Lebanon today are Lebanese Shias, Lebanese Sunnis, Lebanese Druze, Lebanese Christians, and between them, whatever they do, sovereignty of Lebanon is today not secure because all sorts of external forces intervene. France has now intervened, the former colonial power, and gone and given lectures how you must conduct political reform. You have to change the whole political setup, otherwise we won't give you help. We have not reached that stage in India yet, but loss of sovereignty or erosion of sovereignty will to the loss of independence. Inability to have your own independent decision making in the economy, in other social policies, in your political and in your external policy. So apart from this aspect of economic sovereignty, a country always works out its strategic goals, that is to strengthen itself as an independent nation state, to see that economic development takes place within a framework which will be able to provide all the basic necessities of life for its citizens, and to raise their standard of living, and to defend the territorial integrity of that country. Sovereignty involves all that. But today you have ruling classes, since this shift to neoliberalism and the rise of Hindutva communalism, you have seen that now your foreign policy has become not independent. Forget about non-aligned, it is losing an independent basis. And more, what we have been noting over the last 2 decades, successive governments have adopted pro-US foreign policies. And the strategic approach of the ruling classes about their own independence and sovereignty has changed. From the 1990s, US imperialism, American ideologues have been lecturing that sovereignty is a 19th century concept. They're talking about this in the late 20th century. That sovereignty is a 19th century concept. It's outdated. You can't have sovereignty as the main basis for each country's approach and policy. There has to be limited sovereignty. Sovereignty has to be a bridge. Finance capital requires to enter every country. So you can't put any barriers. You can't say it's our sovereign right not to allow it. So sovereignty is a bad word as far as the advanced capitalist countries and imperialism are concerned. They want us to give up or abridge our sovereignty. But that is, we have been, our ruling classes ourselves have been doing it. They've done it in foreign policy, and they've done it in the strategic sphere in our defense and military also. See what is the plight we have reached in. First, Narasimha Rao government was there, 1991, 92, when the liberalization started. You could see the shift beginning. The first agreement for naval joint exercises was done in 1992 itself. The Malabar exercises, which still continue, naval joint exercises, which have stepped up much more. Then UPA government, first 10-year defense agreement was signed. Following that, immediately the nuclear deal, which was the quid pro quo, that we'll give you the nuclear deal if you make agreement with us. And now, under the Modi government, we have reached a stage where we have signed 2 agreements. One, logistics agreement, which is to arrange US armed forces can use our military bases, our airports, military airports, our military naval ports. They can refuel here, get servicing done for their planes and ships, and we can do it in their ports or airports. Who are we going to go and do it? It's their US 7th Fleet or other fleets will come and utilize this. What does that mean? It also means stationing of armed US personnel. This is also now begun under this agreement. Another agreement, the communication operability agreement, so that their military equipment and our military equipment can be integrated. Communications signals, all that can be integrated. Modi government has signed. And the third agreement is now pending. It can be signed any day. Once these three agreements are signed, it means we have become a military ally of the United States. So you are even agreeing to something which could have been unheard of, thought of in the 1950s, when we formulated the non-aligned foreign policy, that foreign forces or troops can use Indian territory and soil. That Modi has now, government has agreed to. Plus, we have joined this quadrilateral alliance, which America had been wanting from 2007, which the Manmohan Singh government went in and came out. They didn't want to get into it because China objected at that time. But now Japan, Australia, India, and US, we have formed a quadrilateral alliance. What is it but a military alliance? To serve whose purposes? Is it to serve our strategic interests or the US strategic interests? So, the neoliberal economic policies and integration with imperialist globalization has undermined our economic sovereignty. The Hindutva communal offensive and the takeover of the state institutions has damaged our political sovereignty, and the pro-imperialist tie-up and link-up is going to undermine our national sovereignty, and all these three things together will end up in undermining or weakening our political independence. So this is a challenge that we face now, and for this, there is no piecemeal approach or fight required. We have to fight against these economic policies and this economic regime which undermines economic sovereignty. We have to fight against the Hindutva, communal and fascistic forces, defend political sovereignty, and obviously political sovereignty includes democracy. And thirdly, the fight to see our country does not become subordinate and our sovereignty is not undermined by our alliance with imperialism. On all these three fronts, we'll have to wage our struggle and battle, and that is how we will be protecting our independence and defending our national sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Prakash. That was a very detailed presentation of the interlinkages which are essential for us to defend national sovereignty and our independence. Now may I request our final speaker who will give the concluding address, the valedictory address, our General Secretary, Comrade Sitaram. Sita?
Thank you, Chairperson. All the comrades of the Politburo present here, my dear friends and comrades. Well, we've heard 5 Politburo members giving their views on various aspects. But the issue that the Chairperson posed at the beginning was defense of India's independence. Why do we need to defend it today, after 73 years? What are the reasons why this has become important? And to understand this, we'll have to understand the basic factor. What does Indian independence mean? What was established when we got our independence? We had established at that point of time a conception of India, which is an inclusive India. A conception of India that included every single diversity and granted it an equal status, at least on paper. In reality, it never happened all through the period of independence. But that erosion that was taking place, that is one aspect of it. But today, what is happening? That independence was the recognition of one fact, that in this immense plurality and diversity that constitutes India, the only thing that can strengthen the unity of our country, integrity of our country, and prosperity for our people is the thread of commonality that runs through this diversity. If any effort is made to impose a uniformity, any uniformity, whether it's linguistic, whether it's religious, whether it's ethnic, whether it's cultural, any such attempt to impose this sort of a uniformity, the country has the dangers of implosion. Now, that is the dangers that are now today before us in the current period. That is why defense of our independence is crucial. Yes, all other aspects are very important. They are all integral to the question of our independence. But the new narrative that has appeared in the country, a narrative that was being built up for all these 73 years, in fact, for nearly a century, that this is, India should be, as it was said earlier, a theocratic, fascistic Hindutva Rashtra, or the Hindu Rashtra originally formulated by the RSS. It was against this formulation that the Indian people rose unitedly. And even in the worst of the combinations and mayhem, partition, we adopted this character of India, this secular democratic character of India. And that is what is the defining role of our independence. Along with that, we said three other things. Secular democracy, federalism, that is the rights of all our states. India is a union of states, Article 1 of our Constitution. Third, social justice. And fourth, strengthening India's sovereignty, economic and political. Now, each one of these foundational pillars are under threat. Defense of independence means defending ourselves from the threats imposed today on each one of these elements. अभी तक आपने 5 हमारे साथियों को सुना. Lots of messages are coming saying, please say a few words in Hindi. So, Chairperson, with your permission, I'm saying a few words in Hindi. और सवाल ये है कि ये आज हमारी देश की स्वतंत्रता की रक्षा की बात मार्क्सवादी कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी कर रही, तो क्यों? क्योंकि आज इस तरीके की चुनौतियां हमारे सामने आई, जितने भी हमारे स्तंभ है, हमारे मौजूदा एक संवैधानिक व्यवहार का और इस आधार का जो बुनियादी स्तंभ है, उन सब पे हमले आज जो है बढ़े हुए हैं और इसको नहीं बचा पाएंगे, ना इस संविधान को, ना हमारे स्वतंत्रता को हम बचा पाएंगे. मोटी सी बात वो है. और ये क्यों आ रही है खतरे? कई सारे पहलू आपने अभी तक सुना. और इसलिए आज के दिन ये हमारी मुख्य उद्देश्य होनी चाहिए कि आज ये संकट जो हमारे सामने जो उभर कर आ रही, इससे बचने के लिए आज हमारे देश की लोगों की एकता को और मजबूत करना और इसको और तेजी और आगे ले जाना, ताकि चुनौतियों का सामना करें, देश को आज बचाए, एक बेहतर भारत का निर्माण हो कल को. वो हमारी लक्ष्य है. I've been asked to speak about this economic and social equality. Now, within the system of capitalism and particularly neoliberal capitalism, economic equality and therefore social equality is something that cannot be achieved within this system in its complete sense. And that is the bankruptcy of neoliberalism that we are seeing today globally. The neoliberal order is bankrupt. But with the pressures of international finance capital and imperialism, they want to keep it alive, and therefore they cannot find a solution to this crisis. Whether it's economic, whether it's political, whether it is social, within the system. The building of that alternative, that is the actual aim of a communist party, and that is what we are all striving for. But that's the longer aim. That's in the long term. But right now, in the short term, what is required is the defense of this, our independence, is that Indian people will have to be provided with the basic responsibilities that your constitution guarantees them. What are we seeing today? An assault on every single aspect of these constitutional guarantees that are there. An assault on every single aspect of these foundational pillars I was talking to you about. Secularism, we've seen the the extent of communal polarization and the atmosphere of hate, the poison of hate that has been spreading in the country, mob lynchings, and these attacks not only against religious minorities and Muslims, but also extending to Dalits, Adivasis, and women, and to the marginalized sections? Now, all these assaults that are taking place are essentially complete violation of the guarantees of this constitution that we have. On the one hand, secularism is under attack. On the other hand, democracy. Anybody who dissents with this government is anti-national. Anybody who raises his voice in defense of the marginalized and in support of their struggles is anti-national. Arrested under UAPA, under Sedition Act, and under the most draconian of provisions. We have a very, very, very merciless authoritarian assault that is taking place in our country today. And this dovetails into what was said earlier by my other comrades, dovetails into the RSS conception of how to convert the secular democratic republic into a theocratic, fascistic Hindutva Rashtra or Hindu Rashtra as they define themselves. And that is the unfolding that we are seeing today. Defense of India's independence means reversing this unfolding. We have to reverse this unfolding. And if we have to reverse this unfolding, for that, we'll have to work out the strategies. What are the issues on which we can mobilize the peoples to reverse? The economic crisis today. We see the agony, economic equality I was supposed to talk about. We see the agony of our people. We've seen under the lockdown how this agony multiplied exponentially. We've seen the growth in 15 million people who had jobs are now out of jobs. We'll see the economy this year plunging to a -7% growth rate. Hunger in our country with massive stocks of food grains. When all these things are there, what is the reason why this sort of economic exploitation is intensifying? The crisis in India and globally is because the purchasing power in the hands of the people has been reduced because of this profit maximization by international finance capital and global corporates. Even during the lockdown, you had the billionaires in the world and in India, our own Reliance, their wealth increasing very, very substantially. So the way out is to provide purchasing power to the people, both for their survival, and that the only way out for that would be that instead of the stimulus packages that you're announcing, which are provision of loans, instead of that, if a direct package is given to the people and money is transferred into their hands, then this sort of a revival is possible. But that can happen how? Instead of this loan packages, use that money for your public investments. Build our infrastructure. We'll generate crores of new jobs in order to do that. And once our youth start getting their jobs and start spending money, then the demand in the economy will rise. And on that basis, a revival is possible. This is perfectly possible. But as it was said earlier, but this is not done because even the pundits of neoliberalism globally are saying that yes, state spending must increase. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Britain, began saying the state should began a speech saying that the state should increase its spending, but he prefaced it by saying, "I'm not a communist, but I'm calling for the state's expenditure to grow." Now, even recognizing this, they won't allow that to happen because then that directly affects the profit maximization. Even international finance capital wants economic stimulus and more spending, but it wants them through loans to private capital. And no private capitalist is going to take any loans and produce anything if nobody is there to buy it. And unless they are bought, they can't make their profits or economy can't grow. So there is a way out. Defense of India's independence is the defense of the right of people to live, right of people to live with liberty and dignity. And that right of people to live can be provided if this alternate trajectory can be implemented. So if you have to implement that alternate trajectory, what is required is a very strong people's movement. And that people's movement, building that movement against all the dimensions of what is happening, as I pointed out, against all the four fundamental pillars of our constitution by this regime, guided by the RSS, this BJP being its political arm, and when in government, it only promotes the RSS political project, agenda of the RSS political project. This is something that has to be resisted only through a powerful people's movement and people's mobilization. That is the way to defend India's independence today. And when you talk of social equality, it's not a question of only, yes, correctly, implementation of reservations, filling up of the backlogs, all that is absolutely correct. But remember, no amount of reservations, no amount of filling of the backlogs alone will give you complete equality, unless there's economic equality. And that economic equality can only come through radical reforms. That involves radical reforms in the distribution of wealth and assets, and that can only again happen under pressure of powerful people's movements. So today, when we speak of the defense of our independence, we should have to strengthen the popular movements against this change in the narrative of India that is being projected. Instead of an inclusive India, which was the product of our freedom struggle, which was the product of our national movement, which was the basis on which we achieved our freedom. Instead of that, what is the narrative that we have today? 15th August, we got our independence, but 5th of August is the day when we had got our real freedom. The abrogation of Article 370-35A, the launching of the building of the temple at Ayodhya on the 5th of August, and what we heard from the Prime Minister today from the ramparts of the Red Fort, he says this is the new India being built. This new India is the negation of our independence and the Republic of India as we know, established by our Constitution. It is against this danger that we'll have to fight. And it is this that will have to be the basis for popular mobilization of the people. That is why today calls for defense of our independence in various aspects that we have discussed will all have a meaning, a practical meaning, only when we are able to mobilize and be able to rouse the Indian people to come forward in their defense. And to do that, we'll have to face these authoritarian attacks. We have to face these challenges. We have to go out with a radical program to the people, which we are doing, because that is the alternative that we have offered to the country, the economic roadmap that the CPIM has put forward during the pandemic and during the lockdown. Apart from exposure of what this government is not doing that it should do, both for the pandemic and for the economic revival. Apart from that, the alternative. What is the alternative that we have? For the economic thing, I told you that this is the alternative. For the social and for the political, the alternative is the grip over state power and the government that these forces have, and the undermining of every single constitutional authority and institution, ranging from the parliament down through the judiciary, down to the election commission, to the CBI, to the enforcement department. All these authorities being undermined. This is the assault that is happening on independent India and our independence. And it is this that has to be resisted to. And in order to understand this, that this is happening because of the fact that the BJP being in power is moving towards undermining your federal structure with complete centralization of all authority, undermining social justice, undermining secular democracy, and undermining our economics and political sovereignty and self-reliance. This entire slogan of Atmanirbhar Bharat that was repeated again this morning from the Red Fort, India, what is being followed by this government is not Atmanirbhar Bharat. It is not a self-reliant India. It is a self-subservient India. Subservience to international, profit maximization by both foreign corporates and domestic corporates. And this is the challenge that we all have to rise up to. आज उस चुनौती का अगर सामना करना है हमें, एकजुट होकर जन आंदोलन को मजबूत किए बिना उन लक्ष्यों के आधार पे, जिन लक्ष्यों के आधार पे हमने स्वतंत्रता हासिल की, उन लक्ष्यों के आधार पे जिसके आधार पर इस भारत का निर्माण हुआ, जहां पर इस विविधता के बीच में जो एकता की धाराएं हैं उसको मजबूत किया जाए, ना कि इस विविधता पर एक किस्म का कोई ना धर्म, ना जाति, ना भाषा, ना संस्कृति थोपा जाए। अगर इससे करने से ना देश की एकता की सुरक्षा होगी, ना हमारे लोगों के लिए, भविष्य के लिए उनकी तरक्की हो सकती। तो आज इस चुनौती का अगर सामना करना है तो आरएसएस का ये एजेंडा जो ये आज के दिन ये भाजपा सरकार लागू कर रही है, जहां पर आज सभी हमारे जो स्तंभ है, हमारे संवैधानिक व्यवस्था के बुनियादी स्तंभ, उन स्तंभों पर जो हमला हो रहा है, उन हमलों का मुकाबला हमें करना होगा। उसके लिए एकजुटता की जरूरत है, एकता की जरूरत है। और हमारी अपील पूरे हिंदुस्तान के अवाम से यही है, आज के दिन स्वतंत्रता आजादी का दिन एक त्योहार है, लेकिन उस त्योहार का मतलब तभी आता है कि उसकी ना सिर्फ रक्षा करें, लेकिन इस स्वतंत्रता को आज रक्षा करते हुए, इस संवैधानिक व्यवस्था का रक्षा करते हुए आने वाले दिनों में एक बेहतर भारत का निर्माण करें। तभी इस स्वतंत्रता को सही ढंग से हम रक्षा कर सकेंगे और हम बचा पाएंगे। So I think that is the essential message that will have to be taken by all of us to the Indian people, and our appeal to the people that defense of India's independence today means not merely the defense of what our constitution contains, but in practice to reverse the assaults that are being mounted on this, the multi-pronged attacks that are being mounted on this. And that multi-pronged attacks, whether it's on the education system, whether it's on the media, whether it's on various aspects that they want to exercise their social and political control, those have to be reversed, and that can happen only through people's mobilization. And our appeal is to come forward. Let us all together today save India, save our independence, and then change it for the better tomorrow. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Comrade Sita. That was a very inspiring call for all forces who want to fight the BJP RSS, who want to fight class exploitation, who want to fight to save India, to come together. तो प्रिय साथियों, हमारे पॉलिट ब्यूरो के कॉलीग्स जो इस सेमिनार में शामिल हुए, एक तो ये टेक्नोलॉजी है जो अलग अलग देश के अलग अलग कोने में है, लेकिन फिर भी हम लोग सब एक साथ मिलकर, केरल से त्रिपुरा कहाँ, बंगाल, दिल्ली, सब एक साथ मिलकर आपके सामने हम लोग शामिल हुए हैं। ये बात सही है कि आज मुख्य बहस इंग्लिश में हुई, लेकिन अगली बार जो हमारा ऐसे ही मुद्दे पर जो हमारे सेमिनार होंगे, जिसमें पॉलिट ब्यूरो मेंबर्स भी शामिल होंगे, वो हम पूरे तौर पर हिंदी में करेंगे। तो आप हमें क्षमा करेंगे कि आज का मुख्य बहस इंग्लिश में था, लेकिन मैं सिर्फ 2 बात कहकर ये यहाँ सेमिनार का समापन करूंगी। पहले बात ये है कि जो ये बिल्कुल स्पष्ट है कि जो आज़ादी के संघर्ष में जो कम्युनिस्टों का रोल रहा, जो वामपंथियों का रोल रहा, जिसमें मजदूर, किसान, मेहनत कशों की आवाज के साथ एक विचारधारा, समाजवाद का विचारधारा से प्रेरणा लेकर उस व्यापक आंदोलन में शामिल होकर आगे बढ़े, और निश्चित रूप पर उसका छाप भी उस आंदोलन पर पड़ा और हमारे संविधान पर कुछ हद तक जनता की ख्वाहिशें, जनता की जरूरतों का भी संविधान पर छाप पड़ा। लेकिन अभी आपने सुना हमारे तमाम साथियों से कि आजादी के ये 73 वर्ष पूरे हुए और 74 वर्ष अभी हमारे इंडिपेंडेंस डे का हम आज हम लोगों ने ये सेमिनार किया, लेकिन इसमें जो पूरा पूंजीवादी रास्ता का जो दिवालियापन हर क्षेत्र में जो दिखाई दिया, हमें कहा जाता है आज कि तुम लोग ऐसे विचारधारा को लेकर क्यों परेशान हो, विचारधारा छोड़ो, थोड़ा व्यापक बनो, थोड़ा लचकदार बनो और विचारधारा को छोड़कर सबके साथ और वो सब करो। लेकिन हकीकत ये है कि आज यही आरएसएस की विचारधारा के आधार पर हमारे पूरे देश के संविधान और हर संस्था को हाईजैक करने का प्रयास करे। जिसकी विचारधारा मजबूत नहीं है वो इस विचारधारा से टक्कर नहीं ले सकते। इसलिए ये अनिवार्य है, डेमोक्रेट हो, हम नहीं कह रहे कि सबको जनवादी तो होना ही है, लेकिन कम्युनिस्ट होने की जरूरत नहीं है, लेकिन कम से कम एक विचारधारा, जो एक स्पष्ट विचारधारा, जो बूर्जुआ पॉलिटिक्स के साथ समझौता करके विचारधारा नहीं। तो ये विचारधारा का भी एक बड़ा संघर्ष है जो हमारे साथियों ने अलग अलग तरीके से आपके सामने रखा। दूसरी बात कि हम लोग चाहते हैं कि एक साथ मिलकर लड़े, और हमने बहुत प्रयास भी किया। आज वो राजनीतिक मुद्दे नहीं है कि हम आपके सामने पेश करें कि कहां कहां कैसे कैसे, हम लोगों ने पूरा प्रयास किया सबको लेकर चले। लेकिन एक बात बिल्कुल स्पष्ट है कि जनता के साथ कोई आए या ना आए, जनता ने तय किया, हम इसको बर्दाश्त नहीं करेंगे। कोल मजदूरों की हड़ताल, आदिवासियों की संघर्ष, दलितों की संघर्ष, महिलाएं अभी सड़क पर उतर रहे हैं, नौजवान छात्र, टीचर, न्यू एजुकेशन पॉलिसी के खिलाफ एक व्यापक एकता बन रही है, व्यापक एकता। तो कोई पॉलिटिकल पार्टी करे या न करे, वामपंथ है, वाम दल है, और जनता मूव कर रही है। जनता ये तथाकथित न्यू नॉर्मल, अब तुम कुछ मत करो और अपने घरों पर रहो, ये नहीं है। जनता के बीच जाएंगे, तमाम कंडीशंस को स्वीकार करके मास्क लगाएंगे, हाथ धोएंगे, सब कुछ होगा, लेकिन जनता आगे बढ़ रही है। ये स्वतंत्रता दिवस पर यही हम लोग शपथ लेते हैं। हमने हमले का पूरा रुख हमने समझ लिया। जो कॉमरेड सीताराम येचूरी हमारे जनरल सेक्रेटरी ने जो आह्वान किया, सब आए, एक साथ मिलो और एक साथ मिलकर संघर्ष करो, ये वर्ग हमला का मुकाबला करो, संविधान बचाओ, देश बचाओ, जनवाद बचाओ, देश बचाओ, धर्मनिरपेक्षता बचाओ, देश बचाओ। तो इसलिए मेरे प्रिय साथियों, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद। मेरे तमाम पॉलिट ब्यूरो के साथियों, बहुत धन्यवाद। आप सबने समय निकालकर आप यहाँ शामिल हुए। आने वाले दिनों में भी आप लोग इसी तरह समय देंगे। धन्यवाद। इनकलाब जिंदाबाद। हमारे स्वतंत्र सेनानी के शहीदों को हम सब सलाम देते हैं। थैंक यू कॉमरेड्स, थैंक यू वेरी मच। प्रांजल।